Mr. Secretary, Ranking Member Portman, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I said at the outset, I hope that we can kind of move on from the debate about the crisis and what happened and how we got here. But I have a lot of respect for you, as you know, Mr. Secretary. But I'm not able to sit here and not comment on this idea that somehow this is Donald Trump's fault. I mean, you can say that the Trump administration should have been letting children in, but you have said instead you think it was inhumane what they were doing by turning children away based on Title 42, which said basically during the COVID-19 period we weren't going to let folks in. And so if that's fine, we can have that debate, but you can't say that and then also say, and the Trump administration is at fault because they didn't prepare for the surge. You're saying they didn't allow children to come in because they, believe that under Title 42 they shouldn't come in, as well as adults and families. Therefore, kids didn't come up to the border. They didn't make that arduous journey from Central America. And then at the same time say they're at fault because they didn't prepare for the HHS facilities that they knew were necessary. They didn't know they were necessary because the kids weren't coming in. These are the facts. These are the charts, okay? I mean, let's just stipulate this so we can move on and talk about policy. And this chart is very clear. You see where the yellow line is. That is the Biden administration inauguration. Actually, I was generous. That yellow line should be one bar to the left. I gave kind of the whole situation a month to kind of percolate so people would know in Central America and elsewhere what was going on. Here's January 21st, this bar right here. Look at that surge. I mean, it's obvious what happened. And you've said it. You said they weren't, allowing unaccompanied kids or families or individuals to just come into the border and then go into the interior. They stopped that practice, and it had the intended effect. People stopped sending their kids up to Central America, paying smugglers, paying traffickers. Those kids, as we've said, facing all kinds of assaults and exploitation. And so, we can agree to disagree on what the policy ought to be going forward. I get that. But let's at least stipulate as to what happened here. And what happened is when the Biden administration came in, they made a decision. You were asked to implement it. I remember talking to you at the time, and you realized this was going to result in some real issues. But the thought was, this is the humane way to go. Let's allow these kids to come in. And so don't blame the previous administration for not having facilities that they didn't need because they didn't have the surge. Again, let's look at the numbers. So here we are. What do we do is the question. And for these kids, you had said earlier about the trauma some of them have faced and the difficulties that their families face in Central America. I get that. If I was a dad in Central America, I would want my kids to have a better life. And as I've talked to children and families on the border, both on our most recent trip and previous trip, they all say the same thing to me, which is they do want their families to have a better life. These kids say they've come here to have the opportunity to have a life where they can not just make more money, but have a life in the United States of America because it's a better place to live. I get that. And I'm all for legal immigration. And I'm all for providing asylum to people who really have a credible fear of persecution. But what we have done instead is just open the doors. And I would make the point that those children who came in 2019 during the last surge, I would ask you, Mr. Secretary, those children were allowed to come into the interior of the United States with sponsors. Some of those sponsors were unscrupulous, as we know, and we've done investigations on this and had hearings on this, and some of these kids were exploited. Some were not. But of those children who came in 2019 who did not receive asylum because they didn't meet the criteria for asylum, how many have been deported and sent back to their home countries?
Mr. Ranking Member, may I comment?
Yes, sir. But I would like an answer to that because I think it's illustrative of where we are now. That you look at your own ICE deportations in the month of April, I'm told they were at an historic low. That people are not being sent back even if they do not receive the asylum. Only 15% of individuals from Central America, I'm told, you can correct me, are successfully adjudicated. In other words, successfully having claimed asylum, receive asylum. And my understanding is there's no process in place to send those other folks back to their country of origin. So surely these smugglers have the opportunity to tell these families in Central America, give your child to me, and that child will get into the United States and indefinitely will be able to stay there. So that's just a policy we need to look at and we need to change. But could I hear your answer on the 2019 surge and how many of those children have been sent back to their home country?
Mr. Ranking Member, assuredly we'll have the opportunity to discuss the many issues that you have raised. It will take me quite a bit of time to answer them fulsomely, but I will do so in bullet point fashion as rapidly as possible. First of all, my parents brought me here to this country so that my sister and I could have a better life. So I'm very familiar with the challenges that we are addressing, and more powerfully and heartbreakingly, the challenges that the parents are facing when they send their children to traverse Mexico to reach our southern border. Secondly, we speak of lawful pathways and support of them, and yet the prior administration tore those down too. They tore down the Central American Minors Program that provided a lawful pathway for the adjudication of children's rights to arrive here in the United States and stay in the United States under the laws that Congress passed, but that was torn down.
Mr. Secretary,
Thirdly,
can I just for a second, before we just continue the blame game here, how many children were processed over a 3-year period through that program, which I support, by the way, and I support reinstating it?
That program should have been built up rather than torn down.
Well, how many children were, during the Obama administration, were brought in under that program?
I would be pleased to provide that data.
Yeah, I think it's about 5,000 children.
Yeah.
5,000 children. Look at these numbers. Over 3 years. So I support that program. But let's not, think that these are going to solve the problems that we face. Anyway, please continue.
That's 5,000 children that were expelled. Next, I do not think that the prior administration supported legal immigration. They threw up every obstacle possible to permit legal immigration. Fourth, the asylum system is in need of improvement. It is in need of strengthening, and that is precisely what we are dedicated to achieving. It has been a years-long challenge preceding the Trump administration, preceding the Obama administration, that the time of adjudication of asylum claims is too long. We need to shorten that, but not at the expense of permitting individuals to develop their legitimate claims through the recovery from the trauma that they might have suffered, and so many, in fact, have suffered. And lastly, with respect to our enforcement efforts, we are focused on enforcing the law and focusing on individuals who pose the greatest threat to public safety, national security, and border security, and that is what we are executing upon, just as I did as a federal prosecutor for 12 years in a jurisdiction of approximately 18 million people with limited resources. We said we're going to allocate those resources to have the greatest public safety impact. I'm proceeding no differently as the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. I appreciate it. Senator Hess.